So a few people have mentioned that they would like to hear more about my trip to Africa and how they can get involved in a similar kind of trip if they wanted to. So I've been wanting to get more involved in projects in sub-Saharan Africa for a long time. I spent much of my younger childhood living in Africa. I often travelled to South Africa to visit my grandparents, aunts, uncle and cousins who still live there, and I spent time in Zambia in my 20s working in a safari lodge in the Luangwa Valley. And since that time I've been involved in conservation and educational projects in that area, but I haven't been able to find a really hands-on approach that I really wanted to get involved in. I've spoken to a lot of charities about supporting the work that they do over there, but nothing ever seemed to quell my yearning to get back out there and do something more meaningful. And then, out of the blue, earlier this year, a client of mine messaged me about a trip that she'd heard was heading out to Malawi to run some workshops with women and to do some work in a school. She sent me some details and literally within a couple of days I had committed to go and my flights were booked. There were 10 of us who went. The group was pulled together by a lady called Kate Webb, who had set up a company called Orbis when she was based in Malawi several years ago. And the organisation was established to enable people to travel with adventure and purpose. So within that group, most of us didn't know each other than the meetings that we had on Zoom ahead of the trip. So on those meetings, we had done a lot of the planning together to prepare for workshops that we would deliver to the businesswomen in Blantyre. And when we met at Heathrow on a Sunday afternoon a few weeks ago, it was the first time that we had ever connected in real life. And it's one of the things that I was nervous about. What if we didn't get on? What if one of the group was really annoying? And as it happened, it was an incredible group and we all got along really well. Remarkably, there wasn't any friction. And if there was anyone in the group who was annoying on the trip, I think it was actually probably me. We were all from really different backgrounds. We had an architect, an accountant, a couple of people with marketing backgrounds, 3 people with a wellness and therapy background, an HR consultant, an exam invigilator and a quantity surveyor. All of us were based in the UK apart from Susan, who is based in Australia, and she had arrived a couple of days early ahead of us and met up with us at Blantyre airport as we arrived. The flight over there was fabulous. It was via Ethiopia and I sat for the final hour looking at the incredible landscape through the plane window as we came to land in Blantyre, which is Malawi's second largest city. There's not much to the airport, and once we had moved through immigration, we met up with Ken, who would be looking after us for our trip, and Ernest, who would be driving the minibus for our trip as well. And it turned out that actually we would spend a lot of time in the minibus. We covered a lot of ground throughout Malawi, and that actually turned out to be really fabulous because it felt like we were seeing the real Africa as we moved through a lot of the villages and covered some of that ground. So our first journey by road was a couple of hours from the airport to the beautiful tea estates, which is home to Huntington House, which would be our home for the next 3 nights. It was originally a family home to the founders of the tea estate and was a beautiful colonial house. We were greeted there when we arrived by staff, we were shown to our rooms and we were told to meet on the lawn for afternoon tea. And we've literally never seen so much food. Afternoon tea was just an incredible feast. We felt terrible that we left so much of it uneaten, but we asked if we could box it up and take it with us the next day to the workshops so that we could share it with the ladies who we were going to meet there. Soon after tea, we piled into the back of a very comfortable pickup truck and drove through the tea estate to have sundowners and had a fabulous vista across the estate. We stopped on the way to watch the monkeys and we actually walked the final stretch as the truck couldn't put us all the way up. So we all piled out and walked, which was actually a really good way to stretch our legs after our long plane journey. The sun goes down in Malawi at around about 5:30 in the evening, and by the time we got back to the house in the dark, dinner was already being prepared. None of us were hungry. We had eaten so much during that tea. But we had the most incredible 3-course meal and then we headed to bed for an early night. Surprisingly, Wi-Fi was available in the main area of the house and we had all been given our own Wi-Fi codes with a quota of data, so some of us connected with home before retiring for the night. And the next day we travelled to Blantyre to run the workshops that we had prepared. And the welcome there was truly a Malawian welcome. The Orbis staff greeted us off the minibus and the ladies who had arrived to spend the next couple of days with us at the workshops greeted us like old friends. And those days that we spent with the ladies were truly incredible. They are such remarkable women who are determined to facilitate change in their country by creating job opportunities and success for themselves. So one of the reasons that I've always been so keen to work with women in Africa is because of the ripple effect that they can create. For every woman who creates success in their own business, it's likely to have a positive impact on up to another 20 people. And that's because they are committed to empowering change not only for themselves and their immediate family, but also for their entire communities. And this was a theme that we saw throughout our time there, a real hunger to change things for the better. The businesses that they were running were really diverse, from schools to bean factories to wig creation to cleaning businesses to social enterprises and so many more in between. And these women face challenges every single day through economic disadvantage, power outages, red tape, connectivity issues, social bias, and yet they show up with determination and resilience. And it was truly humbling to be with them. The workshops that we ran with them covered mental well-being, marketing, proposal writing, and idea generation. And we had prepared those workshops in advance, but it was hard to know what was going to be the most use to them. But honestly, they hung on to every session and they participated with huge enthusiasm and commitment. And we wrapped up our final day of workshops with them with an exercise to help them craft their elevator pitches. And it was so fulfilling to see the difference in the way that they talked about their businesses from the first day when they had stood up and sheepishly introduced themselves to the final day after the workshops when they stood up and spoke with confidence and clarity about the work that they did. And it was truly a highlight of the trip. So from Blantyre, we left at the crack of dawn the next day to head out to do a 2-day climb of Mount Malawi, which is Malawi's highest mountain. And as the mountain loomed ahead of us, we were in awe of its size and excitement as we grew closer. And the idea of the climb was to support the local communities by paying porters to carry a lot of the kit for us. So we only climbed day packs, which felt as though we were cheating, but at the same time we knew that we were actually putting money into the pockets of local families, and that felt good. It was a steep and a hot climb, but the scenery was fabulous, and by the time we stopped for lunch on that first day, we were only about an hour from the hut where we were going to stay that evening. So when we arrived there, we sat and gathered ourselves, and then Laura, one of our group, ran a fabulous yoga session for us, and soon afterwards Dorothy, who was accompanying us from the Orbis office, she suggested taking us to a river where we could all cool off. And it wasn't far to walk, and it was an absolutely inspired idea. We found an area which had deep pools of water and where we could bathe, and we spent a good hour or so splashing around. And it wasn't until we were getting out that we realised that we were covered in small leeches, but it didn't take much to wipe them off, and then we headed back to the hut for food. And that evening the porters lit a fire for us, and we sat around the campfire and made a plan for the next day. Some of us were going to get up early at first light and we would hike to the peak, whilst the rest of the group would head down and meet us at a waterfall near the base of the mountain. We were really fortunate with the moon that night. It was incredibly bright, and so it was a really, really beautiful evening. We slept out on the veranda of the hut, and as the moon came around through the night, it literally felt as though a light had been switched on. I actually got up at 2 a.m. to watch the moon go down over the mountain, as it was so stunning, and it also meant that I watched a weather front move in as the sun rose. So by the time we got to the summit, it was a total whiteout. But it was still a fabulous walk, and actually that walking through the cloud meant that it was much cooler. And as we dropped out of the clouds after we had been to the summit to join the rest of the group at the waterfall, the beautiful African weather resumed, and we had several hours of swimming in the waterfall in the sunshine, which was just beautiful. When we came down from the mountain, we went to a lodge nearby, and we were delighted to be greeted by monkeys as we arrived at our rooms. And it was a short visit because we were leaving first thing the next morning to start heading towards the lake, which is where we would be working with the Rainbow Hope Secondary School. On our way, we stopped for 24 hours at Lwandi National Park, which was incredible. We had to cross the river to the lodge where we would be staying, and before we even got on the boat to cross, we could see the elephants over the other side. That evening we went for a game drive. We saw elephants, lion, buffalo, lots of antelope, and baboons, jackals, monkeys galore. So when we left Lwandi the next day, we headed for Mangochi, which is where the school is based. And we arrived at a beautiful lodge on the shore of Lake Malawi, and we met up that evening to meet with the principal of the school, who told us so much about the work that he and the school are doing with the local communities to change the ideals around teenage girls in education and employment opportunities for women in the area. So it's very acceptable in Malawi for girls to marry at about 14 and then often their mothers by the age of 15. And this creates a perpetual cycle of poverty because education becomes impossible once they're married with children, and yet it's the norm. So infant mortality rates are very high in Malawi, and so are deaths in childbirth. A girl who has attended education is far less likely to die during childbirth. And so the Rainbow Hope School encourages girls to stay in secondary education by providing boarding facilities for them until they finish their education. And this means that they don't get drawn into household tasks when they go home from school in the evening, which is what was happening before they introduced boarding. So our day at the school was incredible. Honestly, what amazing kids. We had prepared a project in advance to talk them through building a business plan for an imaginary cafe. We split them into 5 groups of 10 and we assigned them all roles within their new business and set them up to work with different tasks. And at first the language barrier seemed to be an issue, but before long they were busy working on their business plans, and by the end of the day they presented their plans to the entire school. And afterwards we sat in the school courtyard and we watched amazing performances that they had prepared for us before then heading off to go and play a netball match with the girls. And it was a truly fabulous day. We were honestly so sad to only be spending one day there. And the next morning we headed away. We left to travel over to Blue Zebra Island Lodge, which is an island on the lake. And we spent a couple of days there reflecting on the incredible experiences that Malawi had gifted us so far. And there's so much else I could say about the trip, but this is a whistle-stop tour and hopefully it gives you a flavour of some of the activities that we participated in. But all in all, it was an amazing way to see the country and to travel whilst feeling as though we had delivered small parcels of value along the way of our trip. So for anyone who is wanting to incorporate some kind of purpose into their travel, I would highly recommend speaking to Kate at Orbis and finding out about the next trip that they're organising, because they do these groups on a regular basis. As a group, our participation isn't going to stop here. We'll be meeting again in the next couple of weeks online to decide how best to distribute the funds that we raised before and during our travels. We already made a contribution of books and equipment to the school whilst we were there, but we know we'd like to do something going forward to have some kind of ongoing support for the fabulous ladies that we met and the children at the school. And in fact, if you would still like to donate to all of our ongoing efforts, our GoFundMe page is still live and the link is in the description below. So hopefully this gives you a very small snapshot of our incredible trip. We absolutely loved it, and I would go back to Malawi in a heartbeat. Malawi is known as the warm heart of Africa, and honestly, when you go there and you see the people and you see these incredibly warm welcomes that you're given by the Malawian people, you would really begin to understand why.